So let's start with the slides themselves. So you've seen my slides, and my slides typically have a title and then 2 or 3 bullet points. And these bullet points are usually about a sentence length, maybe 2 sentence length in nature. So you might see 30 to 50 to 70 words on a slide. And you're wondering, do I read every one of those words, Jason? And the answer is it depends. So I know a billionaire. I actually know more than one billionaire. And I'm not going to tell you who they are. You would know them too. They are somewhat famous. And I remember sitting at a table with them at a lunch, and everybody was handed menus. And he turned to the guy next to me and he says, I can't read any of this. I don't know what to order. And this guy's a billionaire. He is functionally illiterate. And the idea here is if I gave him slides with words on them, I would never want him to read them. Now, will we still put words on slides? The answer is yes. Of course we would. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that type of personality should read those words exactly the way that they are written word for word. Now, I, on the other hand, I don't know exactly the combination of me being naturally blessed with the ability to read very quickly and also with the effort I've put in to learn how to speed read. But I can essentially read ahead. I can glance at a slide and read the whole slide in a glance and then be able to organize that information to deliver it simultaneously while I'm reading it all at once. Now, a lot of that comes from practice too. But I've always been one of the fastest readers in class ever since I can remember. And so if you're somebody who can read very, very smoothly off of a script, if you can look at words, see them, and then read them, then you should read them exactly word for word. Absolutely. If you're the type of person who does very well by taking the written word and reading it out loud, then that should be your MO. That should be your approach, to read it word for word. Because the word for word positioning is very important of laboring over in the laboratory the best way to put something. So you don't have to figure that out on the fly. Instead, then you can focus more on the delivery, as long as you can read fluently and smoothly. Now, not a lot of people can. I would say about 5 to 10% of people can do that with little to no practice. And then there's about 30% of people who could not do it with any amount of practice, even if it's an infinite amount of practice. They've reached their limitation. And so most people will fall in the third category with their slides. And this is what I recommend to them. Take the slides that have all those words on them, and when you're going through the slides to get familiarized with the content, bold or highlight or underline a keyword or a phrase in each one of those bullet points. That way, at a glance, you can use those as guides and references. So if worst comes to worst, your backup parachute is you can still read that slide word for word. If you somehow lose the thread, or you get flustered, or you forget where you're going, or you stumble, just ease into word for word until you get your bearings, and then you can go back to it. But what that allows you to do is essentially the same thing that I do, only I can do it with the full content. You can always look 1 or 2 bullet points ahead and know where you're going. So you say, oh, this is highlighted, so this is the next point I'm going to make. Oh, this is the important thing that I'm leading this towards. So I know what's coming and I anticipate it. And then you can say out loud something that varies a little bit from what's on the slide itself. And a lot of my clients are worried about that. They think there's some sort of incongruence there. Jason, if I'm not matching exactly what's on the slide and I'm saying something different slightly out loud, isn't that a problem? The answer is no, that's a huge benefit, because your audience is hearing it 2 different ways, 2 different dimensions, 2 different slight deviations. And that actually creates a lot of texture. And that actually creates a more effective message. Now, most of you aren't aware of this, but if you listen to music, especially popular music, which is impossible to avoid, and I used to be an audio engineer, so I'm very aware of this. Most music tracks that you hear, when you hear somebody's singing voice, it's their voice doubled or tripled or quadrupled. Like backing track upon backing track. And they can't just take the one take audio that's the best delivery and just duplicate it, because they call that phase cancellation. Then if you put the same thing twice or three times, it actually weakens it. So what they have to do is they have to have that person go in there and sing the same thing almost exactly the same, but nobody can replicate the human voice exactly word for word, delivery for delivery every single time. So that slight difference in enunciation when singing, and that slight difference in even pitch and timing, when they blend those two together, you get a voice that is so powerful, you couldn't match that with any human voice. And that's one of the reasons why that sounds so good when you hear it on the radio if it's well produced. So this is similar to that, in the fact that they can read while simultaneously listen to you, and there's enough overlap so the message stays the same, but there's a little bit of variance, and that extra texture actually gets more meat, more punch, more power to this. So if you take that approach that I'm talking about, where you highlight this, and you underline that. And those are also indicators for your audience, but it allows you to use these as guidelines and reference points. So you don't have to spend a lot of time getting familiar with the content before you can take it out in the wild and start pitching. Because the most important thing you're going to do with your webinars is put them in front of an audience and ask somebody to buy. Everybody seems to forget that. Because I will know more about what content lands and what content doesn't land, what I should focus on really getting right, and what I don't even need to put in the presentation based on taking it out in the real world and seeing how people respond to it who are targeted for my offer. And so we want to get that in front of people as fast as possible. Now, we don't want to shortchange the experience. And so this is the shortcut where you highlight a word or bold a phrase or do this or do that. So you can glance at it. You can know what you're saying essentially. The text is still there on the slide, but you can say it slightly differently. And this allows you to say it exactly in your voice. And this allows you to capture and focus more on the emotion you're feeling, which will then translate into a better delivery. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the hack there. Now, some of you like presenter notes. I am not a fan of presenter notes, but that's a personal preference because it takes me out of my element. If I have to remember, when do I look at the presenter notes? So presenter notes, if you're not familiar, are the things only you see, but your audience doesn't see. So if on slide 67, you put a presenter note that says, make sure to take a long pause between the second bullet point and the third bullet point, then you would know that as a note to you, but nobody in your audience would see that, right? And so for some clients, they're very uneasy about having a lot of words on slides. It's not a problem from a conversion standpoint. Trust me, I got $100 million that can show that you can put a lot of words on slides, and that's very effective. In fact, better to have more words on slides than less words on slides. Because again, you don't have to read every single word if you don't want to. But it's good to have too much content and then pare it down, as opposed to not have enough and then have people lost as they're listening to your presentation and following along, okay? But the idea here becomes, if you are so against having a lot of words on your slides that it makes you uneasy, that will affect your delivery. So what you do in that case is you take the slides that have a lot of words on them, and whether we're creating them for you or whether you're creating them on your own, and then you pare those down. So you take a whole sentence and then you take essentially what you would highlight in bold, and that becomes the slide, and then your presenter notes becomes the actual full bullet point. And then even then, you can highlight the phrases in there that you want to use as references, or you can read it word for word. Does that make sense? So those are different. There's no one way that is universally correct. And just because one person does it this way doesn't invalidate other ways from also being effective. But here is the iteration that you want to focus on. What is going to allow you to be able to not be so consumed about the content so you can also be aware and manipulate the delivery of the content? All right?